You know, the good news about that is that Elon has a president that he lets run the company, and her name is Gwynne Shotwell.
Gwynne Shotwell is not only SpaceX's president and COO responsible for the company's day-to-day operations and growth, but also a gifted diplomat. She was instrumental in building a strong relationship between SpaceX and a major national agency, NASA, which resulted in many lucrative contracts. Additionally, she played a key role in resolving tensions between SpaceX and the FAA, helping to get Flight 6 launched sooner than ever. So how did she make that happen? Find out everything in today's episode. Many people think that politics is the main reason forcing the FAA to change its mind and no longer make it difficult for Flight 6's launch license. It's true, but not all. Clearly, the tension would continue to escalate if SpaceX's side doesn't have a deft move. Luckily, Gwynne Shotwell, with her skillful negotiation skills, has solved them all. It's safe to say Flight 6 will be one of the most special test flights that SpaceX Starship has done so far. It is set to take place on November 18th, and the launch window will open during the afternoon. This is the first time we have had a launch window open so late in the day instead of morning, as in previous test flights. The purpose is very clear. This will enable the ship to re-enter over the Indian Ocean in daylight, providing better conditions for visual observations. Conducting the landing in daylight provides better visual feedback regarding the condition of the spacecraft upon touchdown. This is especially important for assessing the heat shield and other components after re-entry, as it allows engineers to visually inspect how well they performed under flight conditions. Also new for Flight 6, SpaceX will be attempting an in-space burn using a single Raptor engine that they canceled in the third test flight. As a vital part of full reusability, can't help but mention the heat shield. Ahead of Flight 5, they conducted a series of changes including stripping off thousands of tiles, installing new articles, and introducing backup ablative. Although the system worked pretty well in protecting Ship 30, SpaceX wasn't entirely satisfied with it. In preparation for Flight 6, they go much further with new secondary thermal protection materials and remove entire sections of heat shield tiles on either side of the ship, in locations being studied for catch-enabling hardware on future vehicles. That is about hardware. Of course, Starship will not be able to fly without regulatory approval. Unlike every other mission launch, this time around, SpaceX didn't need to hedge its bets on the timing of the launch based on regulatory approval. When the Federal Aviation Administration cleared the Flight 5 mission, they also approved the company's plan for Flight 6. The FAA determined the changes requested by SpaceX for Flight 6 are within the scope of what has been previously analyzed, the FAA wrote in an October 12th statement. Any modifications requested by SpaceX to the approved Flight 6 scope of operations may require further FAA evaluation. To some extent, Flight 6 will be a repetition of Flight 5, featuring another suborbital flight with a splashdown of the ship's upper stage in the Indian Ocean. If the November 18th launch date comes to reality, turns out Starship will fly twice before the end of November. At the same time, SpaceX also sets a record for the rocket's fast turnaround with only 1 month and 5 days between two tests. To put it into perspective, let's look at the time between the previous flights. The gap between Flight 1 and 2 is the longest with 7 months. After the explosion of the orbital launch mount on Flight 1, the FAA determined that to obtain new flight permits, SpaceX would have to take 63 corrective actions, 57 of which were promptly addressed. However, the mission's timeline continued to be pushed further. Due to waiting on additional environmental approval from the third party, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service remains pending. A month before Flight 2, SpaceX urged the FAA to ramp up its process at a hearing before the U.S. Subcommittee on Science and Space. Nevertheless, that seems not to work. Starship's following test flights, including Flight 3, 4, and 5, took from 3 to 4 months to launch despite SpaceX's effort to rapidly up its speed. It explains why Elon Musk and his rocket company multiple times blamed the bureaucracy for delaying Starship's progress, and alleged the U.S. was stuck in a reality where it takes longer to do the government paperwork to license a rocket launch than it does to design and build the actual hardware. Tensions between the FAA and SpaceX had reached a boiling point before Flight 5, coinciding with the United States on the threshold of a U.S. presidential election. The U.S. federal agency delayed the fifth launch of Starship to late November rather than mid-September. The company said that the delay was not based on a new safety concern, but instead driven by superfluous environmental analysis. Furthermore, the FAA imposed a series of unreasonable financial penalties on the rocket company. For example, a $633,009 fine against SpaceX on September 17, 2024, for alleged violations of agency rules for 2 Falcon 9 launches in 2023. Presumably, Starship Flight 5 would still be stuck on the ground, further delaying the next flight. Flight 6, if not for this woman's voice. Yes, her name is Gwynne Shotwell, president and COO of SpaceX. Notably, despite inherently taking place quietly behind the scenes at SpaceX, she ultimately speaks out to defend the company and its space programs against unfounded accusations at a congressional hearing with the U.S. House Committee.
But for sure, we want to continue to enhance regulatory efficiency so that regulation does not hold back technology and innovation. This is not an issue for our competitors overseas. It is an issue in the United States. Less so in Texas.
She hints at the sanctions that the U.S. federal agency has imposed on SpaceX, and even baseless arguments that FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker said during a September 24th hearing to defend Starship's licensing delay. Of course, the $100,000 fines are not a big deal for SpaceX. It looks like a heavy blow to the company instead. Whereas it is ramping up its progress towards the goal. Shotwell expressed concerns that government bureaucracy is hindering progress, especially as SpaceX strives to continue launching its massive Starship from South Texas, expand its Starlink satellite internet operations in Bastrop, and enhance engine testing at the McGregor site.
We can build a rocket and get it prepared for launch faster than we can get the bureaucracy to approve us to launch.
Only by addressing these concerns can businesses thrive. As Shotwell stated,
you will probably enhance the regulatory environment, and there's just a caution that you really want to make sure that regulation doesn't impede progress.
Then her hard work paid off. Starship Flight 5 launched on October 13th as expected, and the license to Flight 6 also came to the same time. In addition, previously at the Satellite 2024's opening session, SpaceX's president and COO Gwynne Shotwell gave the details about SpaceX's plans. Shotwell outlined that SpaceX plans to commercialize Starlink satellite lasers later this year, with the service first expected to be announced as part of the Polaris Dawn private crew mission of the SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft. Indeed, in a groundbreaking leap for space technology, the Polaris Dawn mission successfully tested Starlink's laser-powered internet in orbit. Astronauts aboard the mission in space accessed high-speed internet. On September 12th, Polaris Dawn made history with the first private spacewalk, followed by another groundbreaking feat in communications, sending a post on X directly from orbit using SpaceX's Starlink broadband satellites. Hello, Earth! We are so grateful for all the support. Please enjoy 2 recent photos from our mission, and stay tuned for our next message. Sent to you from space over a beam of Starlink laser light. Crew of Polaris Dawn. Additionally, the SpaceX executive shared that the firm plans to fly 148 Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy missions this year. According to her, she'd love to get Starship into orbit, deploying satellites, and recovered, both stages fully recovered, with rapid turnaround on those stages as well. SpaceX would also love to double the customer base for Starlink and launch as many as 7 Dragon missions by the end of 2024. As of November 7th, SpaceX has marked the 105th flight of a Falcon 9 rocket, 2 Falcon Heavies, and 2 Starships this year, totaling 109 launches. The company plans to launch around 40 more missions before the end of 2024. However, with only 2 months left in the year, they may not achieve this goal. Although the company presumably can't reach its initial goal of 148 launches, because of the recent conflicts with regulators, at least, it beats the 98 launches it performed in 2023. Moreover, it has made a name for itself through a series of important national missions. SpaceX was involved in the launch of NASA's Europa Clipper mission on October 14th, which is planned to investigate Jupiter's moon Europa for signs of life. Looking ahead, with Donald Trump winning the White House, SpaceX could accelerate its progress much faster into 2025. Who knows? So what do you think about the future of SpaceX and even its Starship program in the next year? Feel free to leave comments in the section below. One bad news for the US and allied forces. China's military is rapidly building up space capabilities, and in September, they deployed more than 970 satellites that would support attacks on US aircraft carriers, expeditionary forces, and air wings during a conflict. To make matters more complicated, Russia is building a nuclear space weapon capable of triggering large-scale blasts that could destroy the US and other satellites. In response, the US military has steadily increased its budget for space missions over recent years, including raising the ceiling value of the Proliferated Low Earth Orbit, or PLEO, satellite-based services program from $900 million to approximately $13 billion. PLEO is an indefinite delivery/indefinite quantity contract with a 5-year based term and 5 option years. Under this contract, 20 contractors are eligible to compete for task orders. The PLEO satellite-based services program began in 2023 with a $900 million cap over 10 years. Prior to the increase, about $660 million of the contract's original ceiling had been spent. Most of the orders have been for Starshield, the militarized version of the Starlink service. Due to the high level of secrecy of military missions, not much relevant information is leaked. One of the few that was revealed was last October, when the Space Force awarded SpaceX's new Starshield service a $70 million contract. The partnership is part of the service's ongoing effort to leverage private sector involvement in space operations. The Space Force is moving away from long acquisition cycles and pivoting to more commercial capabilities in different mission areas. While SpaceX's contract with the Space Force is the first of its kind, the company has a history of partnering with the U.S. military and government agencies. That has included a host of launches through the National Security Space Launch Program, building satellites for the Space Development Agency, and collaboration on a project for NASA. Additionally, in the future, DoD plans to acquire more than 100 Starshield satellites that would be government-owned. The Pentagon's rising demand for Starshield underscores Starlink's ability to adapt to military field operations, providing high-speed internet that is easy to set up and reliable under challenging conditions. The U.S. Army has increasingly relied on Starshield for its communications needs, utilizing it as a backup system during operations. Last October, the U.S. Army successfully tested a military version of Elon Musk's Starlink communications network, demonstrating its effectiveness in providing uninterrupted communications. Starshield is SpaceX's military business unit, which provides access to the company's Starlink constellation, a fleet of more than 6,000 satellites in LEO, about 1,200 miles above Earth's surface. The growing network of spacecraft provides internet service for private consumers, as well as militaries around the world. It features high-assurance cryptographic capability to process data securely and meet the most demanding military or government requirements. Additionally, the system is designed to be user-friendly, allowing even non-specialized soldiers to set it up quickly on the battlefield. The company has expanded its military space footprint in recent years, providing launch services through its Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets, and receiving its first military satellite production contract in 2021 from the Space Development Agency. In the future, once Starship goes operational, we will witness this mega rocket launch Starshield. With a payload capacity of 100 to 150 tons, and even over 200 tons in its third version, Starship could carry a bunch of satellites simultaneously. The rocket can carry 4 to 10 times more mass to LEO than Falcon 9 and 1.5 to 3 times more than Falcon Heavy. This means each Starship launch could deploy over 100 satellites compared to the current limit of 23, significantly accelerating satellite system deployment to meet the military's urgent needs. Another advantage is its rapid turnaround between flights, aiming to increase the Space Force's launch rate as it builds out a network of hundreds of satellites in low Earth orbit. Elon Musk announced that the Super Heavy rocket that returned safely after launch could be relaunched within an hour. That scenario will totally be possible following the successful recovery of the Super Heavy booster during the 5th test flight of the Starship rocket. During Flight 6, SpaceX will focus more on the upper stage to prepare for the goal of recovering the entire Starship system in the coming year. Also in 2025, SpaceX aims to increase Starship's launch cadence by 25 times, equivalent to 1 launch every 2 weeks. The target of 25 launches annually represents a significant increase in launch frequency compared to previous years. This escalation is crucial for meeting the demands of various missions, particularly those related to lunar exploration and potential Mars colonization efforts. The cost to put satellites into orbit is going to drop even more than it already has with the introduction of Starship, said Brian Clark, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. It's true, because no hardware will be lost on a Starship flight. The only costs will be fuel, maintenance, and use of the pad. $10 million or less per launch for a future Starship version, and, according to SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, eventually $2 million to $3 million. That suggests a launch cost of $100 to $200 per kilogram. Compare this with NASA's Space Launch System, SLS, rockets, which are fully expended on each mission, except for their Orion crew capsules. They will initially cost $4 billion per launch, and may end up around $2.5 billion. NASA will launch only 1 SLS per year at best. Known as the most powerful rocket ever built, the gigantic rocket will be able to put things into higher orbits, which is key for the Pentagon's push to operate in the cislunar environment, the area between the geosynchronous orbit and the Moon. However, there is a challenge here with Starship, given that it will take years to build satellites specifically designed to take advantage of the rocket's payload capacity, said Todd Harrison, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. At this rate, they will have Starship operational this year. We need payloads to go on that if we're actually going to take advantage of it during this window of opportunity when it's a capability only we have. If you want those payloads available next year, you needed to start building them 5 years ago, Harrison said. Therefore, to ensure flexibility, the U.S. military has come up with a better solution, using Starship on its own. The U.S. Department of Defense has reached out to SpaceX to inquire about using Starship on its own, flying the massive rocket as a government-owned, government-operated asset on sensitive and potentially dangerous missions. Currently, the DoD contracts SpaceX as a launch services provider. In this new proposed arrangement, the Pentagon would actually take control of the vehicle on its own. The DoD has been considering using Starship for years. As early as 2020, U.S. Transportation Command was discussing using the giant reusable rocket, which is not yet operational, for transporting cargo or even personnel rapidly around the world. Think about moving the equivalent of a C-17 payload anywhere on the globe in less than an hour. Think about that speed associated with the movement of transportation of cargo and people, former commander of U.S. Transportation Command General Stephen Lyons said in October 2020. There is a lot of potential here, and I'm really excited about the team that's working with SpaceX on an opportunity, even perhaps as early as 21, to be conducting a proof of principle. However, the company's involvement in defense activities has not been without controversy. Most notably, Musk declined to let the Ukrainian government use the Starlink satellite network to coordinate an attack on Russian warships. Indeed, the Ukrainians in September 2022 had asked for Starlink support to attack Russian naval vessels based at the Crimean port of Sevastopol. Musk had refused due to concerns that Russia would launch a nuclear attack in response. Russia seized Crimea from Ukraine in 2014 and claimed it as its territory. Musk was not on a military contract when he refused the Crimea request. He'd been providing terminals to Ukraine for free in response to Russia's February 2022 invasion. However, in the months since, the U.S. military has funded and officially contracted with Starlink for continued support. Musk himself has emphasized the civilian nature of Starlink, saying it needs to be a civilian network, not a participant in combat. Starshield is meant to separate out the civilian and military applications. Still, the revelation has triggered a congressional investigation into Musk's actions, raising questions as to whether the U.S. military needs to be more explicit in future contracts that services or products it purchases could be used in war. Frankly, that doesn't matter for SpaceX and Elon Musk, because the Pentagon is reliant on SpaceX for far more than the Ukraine response. As a passionate advocate for free speech, Elon Musk hesitates to share his public persona and his use of social media. These have at times impacted his company's relationships with the Pentagon and international stakeholders. During the Ukraine conflict, Musk's comments have occasionally sparked controversy. For instance, his suggestions on X about how the Ukraine conflict might be resolved diplomatically have been met with mixed reactions. Such statements have the potential to influence public opinion and international discourse, given Musk's prominence and his company's involvement in the conflict. In October 2022, Musk tweeted a proposed peace plan for Ukraine, which included redoing elections in annexed regions under UN supervision, a move that was widely criticized by Ukrainian officials and drew concern from various international actors. While Musk's companies provide critical services to Ukraine, his personal commentary on the situation can sometimes complicate the public perception of his business ventures. Musk has become increasingly vocal about his political views on X, especially prior to the 2024 U.S. presidential election. Since billionaire Elon Musk endorsed Republican candidate Donald Trump in the U.S. presidential race in July, his rocket company SpaceX became the target for political revenge from some Democratic officials. In September, the FAA announced a 2-month delay to Starship Flight 5 due to paperwork issues as the SpaceX team was getting ready to launch. Afterward, they continued to make it difficult by fining SpaceX $633,009 for 2 Falcon 9 launches that were launched last year for license requirements. This is a surprising thing not only for all of us, but also for Elon Musk himself. While the FAA cited the environmental concerns for hindering SpaceX's progress, the California Coastal Commission blatantly cited the CEO's spread of misinformation on X in rejecting the company's proposal on 50 rocket launches from the Space Force base. In response, Elon Musk's SpaceX has sued a California commission in federal court, seeking an order that would bar the agency from regulating the company's Workhorse Falcon 9 rocket launch program at Vandenberg Space Force Base in Santa Barbara. Fortunately, with the win of Donald Trump to the White House, the tide has turned, and Elon Musk now has the power to change the situation in his favor. The billionaire CEO reportedly began lobbying Trump to hire SpaceX employees for top Defense Department roles to help with government contracts and derail regulators. Elon Musk isn't a big fan of the Federal Aviation Administration and the red tapes. For nearly 2 years, SpaceX has voiced its concerns with the FAA's inability to keep pace with the commercial spaceflight industry. It is clear that the agency lacks the resources to timely review licensing materials, but also focuses its limited resources on areas unrelated to public safety. These distractions continue to directly threaten national priorities and undercut American industry's ability to innovate. This is what SpaceX wrote in a letter to Congress. Adding to the letter, Elon Musk directly criticized the FAA's bias toward SpaceX while blatantly ignoring real safety issues at Boeing. The FAA News leadership spends their resources attacking SpaceX for petty matters that have nothing to do with safety, while neglecting real safety issues at Boeing. This is deeply wrong and puts human lives at risk. NASA deemed the Boeing capsule unsafe for astronaut return, turning, out of necessity, to SpaceX. Yet instead of fining Boeing for putting astronauts at risk, the FAA is fining SpaceX for trivia. Enough is enough. The deep reason behind this is too obvious: political. Elon Musk is one of the most enthusiastic supporters of Donald Trump on his way to becoming president of the United States. It is a huge gamble. Musk either got it all or fell to rock bottom. Fortunately, he wins. So at this point, many wonder, with helping elect Trump, what does Elon Musk expect in return regarding reforming the FAA? Of course, the answer is a friendlier regulatory environment. But how? First of all, Mr. Musk should gain the power to oversee all of the federal agencies that his 6 companies are deeply entangled with, including the FAA. He wanted the Trump administration to hire some employees from SpaceX as top government officials, including at the Defense Department. By placing SpaceX employees in key government roles, Musk aims to strengthen the relationship between his company and federal agencies. This could facilitate more favorable policies and decisions that align with SpaceX's business interests, particularly given that the DoD is one of SpaceX's major clients for satellite launches and other services. Additionally, once Musk gets sick of the slowness caused by bureaucracy, having SpaceX employees in government positions could help promote a culture of agility and responsiveness in national contracting, which aligns with Musk's vision for rapid technological advancement. Last but not least, the effect could be to remove or weaken one of the biggest checks on Musk's ambitions, the strict regulations. This will benefit Musk's goal to get faster approval for Starship test flights and licensing for the hundreds of launches SpaceX is already conducting annually. As you can see, the biggest reason for Starship's previous test flights being delayed was the FAA's environmental concerns. It would make sense that the FAA would tend to be very strict in the early days of Starship development. But as the vehicle becomes more reliable, the FAA's restrictions become more and more unreasonable. A typical example is in September, when the FAA delayed the Flight 5 license decision by 2 months, from September to November, even though in Flight 4, both the Super Heavy booster and Starship successfully splashed down in the Gulf of Mexico and Indian Ocean, respectively. The drive behind this is what SpaceX called a superfluous environmental analysis. That coincided with the criticisms of members and industry officials at a hearing by the House Space Subcommittee about the FAA's implementation of a new set of launch licensing regulations, known as Part 450. Donald Trump's return to the White House 4 years after he left office could portend significant changes in U.S. space activities. Scott Pace, director of Space Policy Institute, George Washington University, said, "The election of President Trump and soon-to-be Vice President Vance is a terrific win for U.S. leadership in space. Continuing President Trump's policies from his first term, I believe we will see dramatic growth in the commercial space economy, a stronger U.S. Space Force, and U.S. missions to the Moon and Mars that will shape the international environment in favor of American values." Trump's first term brought some pretty dramatic changes to the space program, mostly due to Vice President Mike Pence's leadership of the White House National Space Council, with veteran space policy expert Scott Pace as executive secretary. A few of the enduring highlights are initiating NASA's Artemis program, modernizing commercial space regulations at the FAA and the Department of Commerce, and issuing 7 space policy directives, 5 executive orders, and an updated national space policy. Musk's ambition to increase Starship's launch cadence will be broadly supported by the second Trump administration. Trump said he'll put Musk in charge of a government efficiency commission to reduce the size of government and cut back federal spending. He also is in lockstep with Musk's vision of putting people on Mars instead of the Moon. Simultaneously, he was a Mars advocate for the first time too, which is shown clearly through his tweet on X in 2019. "For all of the money we are spending, NASA should not be talking about going to the Moon. We did that 50 years ago. They should be focused on the much bigger things we are doing, including Mars, of which the Moon is a part, defense, and science." One more interesting tidbit during Donald Trump's first term, Space Policy Directive 2, SPD2, was produced, which aimed to streamline regulations for commercial space activities. It faced obstacles from the FAA and NASA, but this time, the White House will push even harder. SPD2, signed on May 24, 2018, sought to ease regulatory burdens on the burgeoning private space industry by directing the Secretary of Transportation to develop a new regulatory framework for launch and re-entry operations. This included considerations for a single license for all commercial spaceflight activities and a review of existing regulations that could hinder growth in the sector. If the relationship between Musk and Trump remains positive, then the prospect of a future where the FAA is reformed and the number of Starship launches surges is certainly possible. So how about you? Do you believe in that future? Please comment Starship GO in the comment section below. In addition to the FAA, other agencies must also make changes to adapt to the innovation, most notably the California Coastal Commission. This change will be feasible if SpaceX successfully brings its staff into the Defense Department. The Commission is in trouble for citing political reasons to hinder innovation. In mid-October, the California officials voted 6-4 against the U.S. Space Force's request to allow SpaceX to increase the number of launches of its Falcon 9 rocket at Vandenberg Space Force's base from 36 to 50 a year. This came after Elon Musk's so-called aggressive insertion into the U.S. presidential race via his political posts. Musk's posts are not the only reason for Commissioner Gretchen Newsom's concerns. Working conditions at SpaceX also. She said that rather than prioritizing the welfare of SpaceX employees and the environment, the focus has been on profit maximization. Commission Chair Carol Hart added that the political matter in this case involves both the U.S. government and the Coastal Commission. Yes, I agree that Musk's political posts supporting Donald Trump have a significant impact on the upcoming U.S. presidential election. But for the Coastal Commission, I don't know what the impact is. And Elon Musk also strongly agrees with me. Incredibly inappropriate. What I post on this platform has nothing to do with a coastal commission in California, SpaceX's CEO wrote. After the historical Starship test flight, Polaris Dawn's commander, Jared Isaacman, in addition to sending his congratulations to SpaceX, shared a tweet about the political tension between Elon Musk and California officials. I criticized the California Commission yesterday for impeding SpaceX's progress. He added, "Unlocking the secrets of the universe should transcend politics. Besides, the political battle will still be there tomorrow." Questions have been raised as to whether actions by the space exploration company owned by Musk should be considered federal or private activity. The commission, which aims to protect California's coast and ocean, disagreed with SpaceX and the military characterizing the launches as federal agency activities, which would exempt the company from obtaining a permit. Commissioners argued that SpaceX was primarily a private company and should therefore obtain a permit itself. "It is essential that SpaceX apply for a CDP," Hart said, referring to a coastal development permit, adding, "There is no other way forward in my opinion." Their given reason is that 80% to 87% of SpaceX's rocket launches are not carrying U.S. government payloads, but satellites for one of Musk's other private companies, Starlink. But in fact, according to the analysis from Alex, a physics engineer who keeps up with SpaceX news, SpaceX doesn't need to apply for a CDP because the U.S. Space Force has rightfully declared that the increase of SpaceX launches from Vandenberg is a federal matter of national security. Now, the Commission realizes that if it votes in favor of the consistency certification of the U.S. Space Force, it would be impossible to then find a plausible environmental reason to deny SpaceX a CDP that's based on the exact same parameters as the U.S. Space Force's consistency certification. Therefore, they have already made up their mind that they would reject the consistency certification of the U.S. Space Force, then forcing SpaceX to come before the Commission to apply for CDP and finally denying them. Oh my God, this is exactly a classic example of red tape in government, isn't this? That is exactly the problem. The Biden-Harris administration absolutely could override the California Coastal Commission, but they are doing everything they can to damage SpaceX. Elon Musk replied angrily to Alex's post. This is why SpaceX has filed a federal lawsuit against the Commission to seek an order that would bar the Commission from regulating its rocket launch program at Vandenberg, Alex said. And guess who has endorsed the California officials? U.S. Space Force had initially shown toughness against the Commission's unreasonable demands. regarding environmental safeguards and monitoring at Vandenberg for the increased number of SpaceX launches. Ridiculously, they then seemed to reverse their stance, agreeing to all Commission requests to increase monitoring and to set up an interagency working group that includes U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the National Marine Fisheries Service, and the Federal Aviation Administration to address concerns as the number of launches increases. Of course, we have no idea what led the plot twist from the Space Force, but we acknowledge that that would pave the way for further action by the Commission against Elon Musk and SpaceX. However, everything didn't stop there. Just 1 week after, or on October 18th, we have already seen its new action regarding awarding SpaceX $733.6 million in the form of 2 National Security Space Launch Phase 3 Lane 1 launch service task orders. All of these national security launches would take place from Vandenberg, where the California Coastal Commission rejected SpaceX's plan. Well, you can understand this as a protectionist move by the Space Force towards SpaceX at Vandenberg. SpaceX's important role in the U.S. rocket industry and Donald Trump's ability to win the race to the White House has forced the Space Force to reverse their stance to back Elon Musk. While developing SpaceX's Raptor rocket engine, Elon Musk and his team faced several challenges. One of the main challenges was simplifying the complex features that other rocket engines had. They had to pioneer new technology, master a full-flow staged combustion cycle, and redesign all inherent components of the engine. This was a significant shift from the existing technology and required extensive research and development. Additionally, they had to ensure that the Raptor wasn't only simplified, but also possessed superior power. This required a high level of innovation and creativity. And now, SpaceX has done the seemingly impossible. In August, SpaceX CEO Elon Musk stirred up the space community with a photo of Raptor 3 that looks so neat. This is in stark contrast to the Christmas tree look of the previous 2 versions, version 1 and 2. As Everyday Astronaut puts it, this is absolutely absurd engineering to simplify an engine down like this. What looks simple on the outside only makes for more complexity on the inside, so this must be a masterpiece. Indeed, to develop a simple system, the SpaceX team has spent a ton of time researching, developing, and testing state-of-the-art technologies that have not been done before. Elon Musk confirmed that in his tweet, the amount of work required to simplify the Raptor engine, internalize secondary flow paths, and add regenerative cooling for exposed components was staggering. The latest iteration of the Raptor engine, referred to as Raptor 3, has undergone extensive part consolidation. This means that many previously separate components have been integrated into fewer, more complex parts. Take, for example, in the transition from Raptor 1 to 2, engineers removed a large amount of plumbing and sensors. Many valves were combined into valve plates, helping further simplify plumbing. In the case of Raptor 3, the heat shield is the part that should be removed in the first place to save the potential mass.
Yeah, the next-gen Raptor engine needs no heat shield.
Right.
However, heat shield plays a vital role in managing the extreme thermal conditions experienced during launch and re-entry. So, how to remove it without damaging the engine itself? Elon Musk previously explained on X that if we can delete and integrate enough secondary structure, small fiddly bits, then we can locally protect, rest, and delete engine heat shields. In detail, everything is regeneratively cooled, he said. Elon Musk mentioned this during a part of Everyday Astronaut's Starbase tour. Clearly, with the heat shield removed, the Raptor will be exposed, so it has to have cooling.
And because it's exposed, it has to have cooling. So there's integral cooling circuits throughout all the parts. So it looks very simple on the outside, but it's complicated on the inside.
Like even all throughout the pre-burner and the gas manifolds and everything, it's all...
All that stuff you see stuck on the side disappears.
Wow.
And of course, the heat shield isn't the only part that's been removed.
And we also eliminate a whole bunch of bolted and welded joints.
Wow.
So, especially the bolted joints, you really want to get rid of those.
Yeah.
Such simplification is aimed at reducing manufacturing complexity and improving reliability while maintaining or enhancing performance. So, how do we simplify the structure while still increasing performance? with 280 tons of thrust. V3's thrust-to-weight ratio is improved compared to previous versions. The key to this lies in the pressure inside the combustion chamber. Raptor 3 chamber wall might have the highest heat flux of anything ever made, Musk said. As the pressure within the combustion chamber rises, the propellants, fuel, and oxidizer are forced to combust more efficiently. This leads to a higher temperature and pressure, which enhances the energy released during combustion. According to Newton's third law of motion, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. When the exhaust gases are expelled at high velocity, they create a reaction force that pushes the rocket in the opposite direction. This enhanced thrust enables rockets to carry heavier payloads, achieve higher velocities, and undertake more ambitious space missions. A higher chamber pressure leads to a greater thrust output, enabling a higher thrust-to-weight ratio. This ratio is crucial as it signifies the amount of force the engine can produce in relation to its own weight. A higher thrust-to-weight ratio empowers the rocket to carry heavier payloads or achieve enhanced acceleration, thereby expanding the range of missions it can undertake. Furthermore, the importance of chamber pressure extends to the design flexibility of rocket engines. Higher pressures offer engineers the ability to achieve desired performance characteristics while maintaining compact and lightweight engine designs. This flexibility is crucial in enabling the development of advanced launch vehicles, like Starship, capable of fulfilling various mission requirements, including crewed missions, deep space exploration, and satellite deployments. Another secret behind Raptor 3 is internalizing secondary flow paths, which involves redesigning how propellants and gases move within the engine. This can lead to improved efficiency and performance by optimizing how fuel and oxidizer are mixed and burned. However, it also adds complexity to the design and manufacturing processes, because precise engineering is required to ensure that these internal pathways function correctly under extreme conditions. In conclusion, part consolidation, weight reduction, and the ability to design complex internal structures are those that make Raptor 3 stand out from the crowd. However, it wouldn't be possible for SpaceX to bring that to reality without the support of 3D printing technologies. And fortunately, SpaceX is home to some of the world's most advanced 3D metal printing technology. A further comment from Steve Jurgensen, an early VC investor in SpaceX, suggests that the latest Raptor has been made possible with additive manufacturing, AM, sharing that additive manufacturing internally integrates so many formerly discrete components. Additive manufacturing, also known as 3D printing, is a computer-controlled process that creates three-dimensional objects by adding material in layers. It's used in many industries, including aerospace, automotive, and medical. While SpaceX hasn't provided any specifics about how AM may have been used to optimize the Raptor's design or internalize some of those components, Musk appeared to confirm the use of AM in a further comment, responding, "Indeed, it is not widely understood that SpaceX has the most advanced 3D metal printing technology in the world. Additive manufacturing has several advantages over traditional manufacturing. First, it can create bespoke parts with complex geometries that are difficult to make with traditional methods. It generates less material waste and also reduces lead times. It allows users to customize, repair, or create unique objects. The rapid rate of development in new space applications has turned the sector into a major adopter of metal AM technologies. Ariane Group has been using metal AM for the production of heat exchangers for its Ariane 6 rocket launcher and components for communication satellites. Earlier this summer, Intuitive Machines' Odysseus landed on the moon supported by a 3D printed component by Sayaki in the upper section of its engine nozzle. And back in March, Ursa Major successfully launched its Hadley engine, which can be built in a matter of days due to its reliance on AM. Clearly, upgrading Raptor 3 offers many benefits, such as saving manufacturing time and expenditure. As you can see, the production of a Raptor 1 engine initially took SpaceX around 11 days, whereas for the optimized Raptor 2, that time was reduced to just 2 days, and eventually to a remarkable 1 day per engine. This significant improvement underscores the advantages of simplification in design. For Raptor 3, production rates could potentially reach dozens of engines per day, a rate typically associated with manufacturing industries, not the rocket industry. This capability will be crucial to meeting future launch demands as SpaceX aims to build and fly vast numbers of Starships annually. Given the reduction of manufacture time, the cost per Raptor 2 engine has also dropped to an astonishingly low figure, between $1 and $2 million. When scaled for mass production, this cost could decrease to as little as $200,000 per engine. The simplicity of the Raptor 3 also promises to drive costs down to unprecedented levels, though it's difficult to predict just how low these costs will go once mass production begins. Additionally, the simple design of Raptor 3 contributes to making Elon's goal come true. Turning around the Super Heavy booster within an hour and launch the Starship daily. It has a point. The rocket engine's simple design reduces maintenance time between flights, thus also decreases the vehicle's turnaround time. In summary, with the amazing features of the Raptor 3 rocket engine, the future is going to be fantastic. The International Space Station may have 6 more years to go before it gets deorbited by a monster dragon. In June, NASA announced a contract worth up to $843 million that they awarded SpaceX to develop a vehicle to deorbit the ISS. The deorbit vehicle will be based on Dragon, which transports crew and cargo to the ISS. Indeed, the Dragon spacecraft will be outfitted with a new trunk section that can carry additional propellant, as well as engines, avionics, and new ways of power generation, specifically fit for the task of deorbiting the space station. This one-off craft will be larger than a standard Dragon and have 6 times the propellant and 4 times the thruster power. The thrust maneuver has to be strong enough to bring the spacecraft into an elliptical orbit or an oval-shaped path so that it's properly captured by the atmosphere. This will ensure a controlled descent through the atmosphere so that the remaining fragments of the space station end up in a remote area of the Pacific Ocean. To develop a such vehicle, both NASA and SpaceX conducted a planned ISS reboost using a Dragon spacecraft that had docked at the ISS to collect the needed data. The test took place on November 8th, and on November 4th, SpaceX launched a cargo Dragon spacecraft for the company's 31st commercial resupply services mission for NASA. In addition to carrying over 6,000 pounds or roughly 21 kilograms of scientific investigations and cargo launched to the ISS, Dragon, while on the station, did reboost the ISS for the first time ever as the company prepares to eventually kill the orbiting complex. The reboost began with the ignition of Dragon's thrusters around 12:50 p.m. ET. The burn was expected to last about 12.5 minutes to raise the station's orbit. The test is the first step in planning the careful destruction of the space station and time for SpaceX to prove that it's got what it takes. By the way, the test also serves for ISS's altitude control. As any human object in space, the ISS needs to be periodically reboosted to compensate for atmospheric drag and maintain the correct altitude. Traditionally, Russian Soyuz spacecraft have fulfilled that reboost capability, but things are changing rapidly. Russia remains a partner in the ISS after its unsanctioned invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Even though most other international space agreements ruptured, the ISS is a policy project and cannot operate as independent bits, NASA has emphasized. In 2018, Northrop Grumman also did a reboost test using Cygnus, but it was not until 2022, as Russia was threatening to invade Ukraine and questions arose about Russia's commitment to the ISS, that NASA started using it operationally. Cygnus's reboost capabilities are quite limited compared to Progress and Zvezda, however, and Russia continues to conduct the vast majority of reboost operations. And Cargo Dragon is not exceptional, but for Bill Spetch, NASA ISS Operations Integration Manager, this is an important flight test objective for this mission as we continue to increase the capabilities of all the vehicles on ISS. What's clear is that selecting SpaceX for this mission is NASA's clever decision. The $843 million contract value appears to fit within the expectations NASA set for the program. According to plans for the U.S. deorbit vehicle, USDV, in March 2023, The agency came up with an internal cost estimate a little bit short of about $1 billion, but hoped that the industry could offer a lower price. Although that deorbiting is scheduled for around 2030, it would be possible if NASA and the ISS partners elected to extend the station's life beyond the planned 2030 retirement. That will happen if there are no commercial LEO destinations ready to support NASA's ongoing needs in LEO by 2030. By then, the USDV can dwell on the ground while awaiting a final deorbit decision, and the procurement to store the vehicle until the mid-30s is also under NASA's responsibility. NASA and the other Western partners on the ISS, Canada, Europe, and Japan, have all agreed to operate the ISS until 2030. Russia, the other partner, has agreed to only 2028, which NASA officials previously stated is linked to the Russian space agency Roscosmos operating in 4-year increments when planning the station's future, in this case from 2024 to 2028. NASA has been supporting the development of commercial stations, which the agency calls Commercial Low Earth Orbit Destinations, or CLDs, with the goal of having one or more such stations in orbit and certified for use by NASA astronauts by the late 2020s. That would enable a transition from the ISS to the commercial facilities by 2030, followed by deorbiting the ISS. Not only lower cost, Dragon stands out by its reliability, keeping up with NASA's requirements. It will be a new spacecraft design or modification to an existing spacecraft that must function on its first flight and have sufficient redundancy and anomaly recovery capability to continue the critical deorbit burn. As you know, the Cargo Dragon spacecraft conducted 31 commercial resupply missions to the ISS so far, demonstrating its high safety. It's the reason why NASA can trust that the deorbit vehicle that is designed on the current Dragon is capable of performing its mission objectives successfully on its inaugural flight. Furthermore, SpaceX has also to ensure that its brand new vehicle has backup systems in place for critical components, such as propulsion, avionics, and control surfaces. For example, if one engine fails during launch or landing, having additional engines can ensure that the spacecraft can still complete its mission safely. A typical example is the Starship's case, given that the rocket is designed with multiple Raptor engines. Even if one fails, others can maintain thrust. The ability to recover from anomalies, unexpected events that could disrupt normal operations, is also the company's advantage. This capability includes not only having redundant systems, but also incorporating advanced software algorithms that can manage and mitigate issues in real time. For instance, SpaceX's approach to Starship includes sophisticated software for switching landing engines and controlling thrust vectoring in case of engine malfunctions. So, at this point, have you ever wondered how will NASA go about bringing down a massive structure, like the ISS, by a spacecraft? Even at the station's current orbital height of some 400 kilometers above Earth's surface, it still experiences drag from our planet's atmosphere as it orbits. According to the agency's current plan, when it's time to come down, the station's natural orbital decay will be enhanced by controlled maneuvers to further lower its altitude. Once the final crews depart the ISS, NASA plans to allow the station's orbit to further decay over 12 to 18 months. Then, a final deorbit will be facilitated by a modified version of the highly successful SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. The deorbit Dragon vehicle will use 46 Draco thrusters to perform several propellant burns to shift the orbit ever lower, as well as undertake a final burn to precipitate the ultimate descent of the station. As the station descends through the atmosphere, it will undergo intense heating due to friction with air molecules. This will cause the station to break apart and largely burn up. Many parts of the ISS will simply be consumed by the fire of re-entry, while a few of the larger and more durable sections, such as the trusses that hold the station together, will likely survive the final plunge to impact the ocean and sink to the seafloor. SpaceX plans to have the deorbit vehicle completed by 2028, and NASA plans for the final deorbit event to occur in 2031. In conclusion, it's so great to see that SpaceX has been contributing its scientific achievements and innovations to serving humans' dreams. That is not just manifested in NASA's USDV. Let's take a look at Starship. Designed with the mission of transporting large amounts of cargo and people to the Red Planet with the goal of colonizing Mars. The vehicle has undergone 5 tests in 2 years and is on track for its 6th testing scheduled on November 18th. The testing will mark a new milestone for Starship on the path of being fully reusable. The flight will have a similar profile to Flight 5, including a suborbital flight to the Indian Ocean and a super heavy capture attempt using the chopsticks. However, the focus will be shifted to some extent to the ship to test the other components, such as flaps, heat shield, and the ability of an in-space burn of a single Raptor engine, demonstrating the deorbiting capability of Starship. The flight is planned to take place at a time of day such that the ship re-entry will occur in daylight for better visual observations. President-elect Donald Trump's return to the White House next January will likely bring big changes for the U.S. space industry, particularly concerning one of the biggest corruption projects, NASA's Space Launch System, SLS. The centerpiece of the Artemis program that debuted in 2022 when it launched the uncrewed Artemis 1 flyby mission of the Moon. The SLS has faced considerable criticism over its costs and management, with estimates suggesting it could reach $4.1 billion per launch, making it one of the most expensive rockets ever developed. Critics also argue that the SLS was designed more to preserve jobs within the aerospace industry, rather than to meet genuine exploration needs. Meanwhile, the program's Orion crew capsule has faced issues with its heat shield that a recent audit determined threatens the safety of the crew, and with it, the timeline of NASA's goal to land humans on the Moon in September 2026. For a long time, we have been calling for the elimination of this tax-intensive project, but nothing has changed much. Fortunately, in Trump's second term, and especially with the appointment of SpaceX CEO Elon Musk to head the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, the requirements will be answered. In recent months, Musk has vowed to identify $2 trillion in savings from the federal budget as the head of a new Government Efficiency Commission, as the way to ensure taxpayer money is spent in a good way. A rich source of opportunity for cost-cutting and a conflict of interest for Musk could be NASA's massive SLS. During Donald Trump's first term from 2017 to 2021, significant advancements were made in U.S. space policy, particularly with the initiation of the Artemis program to return humans to the Moon for the first time since the Apollo era. It was championed by Vice President Mike Pence as the chair of the National Space Council and space policy expert Scott Pace as executive secretary. Talking about this matter, John Logsdon, who established the Space Policy Institute at George Washington University, said, "Space was an area of policy stability during the first Trump administration. With Elon Musk likely in a position of influence, that is not likely to be the case this time around." His argument is hinged on the development of the low-cost rocket market, pioneered by SpaceX. At present, the company's line of rockets embraces Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy with $69.75 and $97 million cost per launch, respectively. These figures are a fraction of the $4.1 billion cost of SLS. SpaceX's next-generation rocket, which is under development, is promised to cost less than $10 million for cost per launch. Not only are commercial rockets much cheaper, but they are even more suitable for scientific missions than traditional rockets, as proven by the many national missions they serve. A typical example is the case of the Europa Clipper mission. Congress originally mandated SLS as the launch rocket, but then switched to SpaceX's Falcon Heavy. Europa Clipper is the first mission designed to conduct a detailed study of Jupiter's moon Europa, where Falcon Heavy operated at the expendable mode. Congress's choice stems from Falcon Heavy's cost of $178 million at expendable mode versus the $2.5 billion SLS cost at the time, since risen to over $4 billion. That was along with other SLS liabilities like limited availability manufacturing capability and vibration. The successful launch on October 14th further confirms the increasingly large role of SpaceX's rockets for NASA's expensive and important projects. Given that SSLS and the broader architecture of the Artemis program are deemed to get a hard look, even as NASA Associate Administrator Jim Free urged the incoming administration to maintain the current plans. Historically, SLS and Orion development has received substantial funding from a broad coalition. The program supports more than 69,000 jobs nationwide as of 2019. This led to the recent tweet of Eric Burge, the trusted senior space editor at Ars Technica. To be clear, we are far from anything being settled, but based on what I'm hearing, it seems at least 50 that NASA's Space Launch System rocket will be canceled. Not Block 1B, not Block 2, all of it. There are other ways to get Orion to the moon. It's not exaggerated as calling SLS by a pretty ironic name, the Senator Launch System, since it relates to the JOB program and the voice of the senators in some states. However, without the political matter, it seems Congress is ready to withdraw from this troubled program. And the question here is, what is the alternative? In Eric's view, it could be Falcon Heavy. My sense is that the solution would be launching Orion on one rocket, probably Falcon Heavy, from 39A, and then docking with a separately launched Centaur 5 and boosting it to the moon. There are three possibilities for this scenario. First, Falcon Heavy could be used for Orion test flights as fast as lunar re-entry speeds. Using Falcon Heavy for Orion test flights could enable rapid testing of systems under conditions that mimic lunar re-entry speeds, which is critical for ensuring the spacecraft's heat shield and systems perform reliably during actual missions. Second, it is for LEO Orion missions, including manned test flights and ISS access. Orion is around 26 tons, and Falcon Heavy is designed to carry payloads ranging from 20 to 50 tons to low Earth orbit. Third, for Artemis II mission free return lunar flyby, saving a costly and rare SLS rocket for another mission. SLS costs the taxpayer $4 billion per launch, much higher than Falcon Heavy. The method, Eric said, echoes past lunar missions, where multiple launches were coordinated to achieve complex objectives. NASA's past lunar missions have often involved coordinating multiple launches to achieve complex objectives, particularly during the Apollo program, and more recently with the Artemis program. For instance, in Apollo 10 in 1969, which served as a dress rehearsal for the first lunar landing, a single launch of the Saturn V rocket was conducted. But it tested all elements of the lunar landing mission, including the lunar module, LM, separation and descent profile, without landing on the moon. Or Apollo 11, the first successful crewed lunar landing, also witnessed a single launch, but it required precise coordination of the Saturn V rocket and the lunar module to achieve its objectives. The latest is NASA's Artemis mission, particularly Artemis III, the mission to return humanity to the lunar surface. This mission will involve launching components separately, including the Orion spacecraft on SLS and a human landing system, HLS, developed by SpaceX, that requires multiple launches to deliver propellant to a depot in lunar orbit before landing. Honestly, the idea of using Falcon Heavy was presented for the first time by NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine. In 2019, he proposed using an expendable Falcon Heavy rocket to launch the Orion capsule to the moon. The proposal was to add an interim cryogenic propulsion stage to the second stage of the Falcon Heavy, and then place the Orion spacecraft on top. The idea was that this rocket could send Orion to the moon at a fraction of the cost of the Space Launch System program. However, NASA ultimately decided to use the SLS program exclusively to launch the Orion capsule, and the reason behind this is not unfathomable. The U.S. national agency is required by the U.S. Congress to use the SLS for its Artemis missions. This mandate ensures that the SLS is the primary vehicle for launching Artemis 1, 2, and 3, aligning with the role of the SLS program as a job creation initiative and aligning with congressional mandates to utilize American companies and resources. With 3,800 suppliers from all 50 states, SLS makes it a significant contributor to the U.S. economy. According to Eric Berger, after Jim Bridenstine proposed this idea during a congressional hearing, he got called to Senator Richard Shelby's office. Shelby bluntly told him to shut off, and that if Artemis crews did not launch on SLS, there would be no funding for Artemis. Another reason is related to technique. You know, Congress has not yet authorized the Falcon Heavy to be human-rated. Human rating a vehicle like Falcon Heavy would require extensive modifications and documentation to meet NASA's safety standards. This process involves not only engineering changes, but also a significant amount of paperwork and compliance with regulatory requirements. As a result, the timeline of Artemis 1 in November 2022 would not be feasible. When mentioning that timeline, some speculate that November 2022, like others, is just an artificial deadline that they set to try and make something happen during Trump's first term and believed Boeing about accelerating SLS. In fact, the decision to not human rate Falcon Heavy may involve congressional oversight and funding allocations. Congress has mandated specific requirements for NASA's crewed spaceflight initiatives, and any changes to the launch vehicles used for these missions must align with those directives. Consequently, although Falcon Heavy was designed with human rating capabilities in mind, SpaceX has not pursued the necessary certification for crewed flights on this rocket. The development of SLS began in 2011, and the first congressionally mandated launch in late 2016 was delayed by nearly 6 years, with blame mostly falling on Boeing, SLS's main contractor. In response, Boeing spoke to deny its poor performance on SLS. In 2020, via teleconference with Aviation Week editors, Leanne Carey, president and CEO of Boeing Defense, Space and Security said, "Boeing is a bit late on delivering the Space Launch System, SLS, and it was left out of NASA's competition to build a lunar lander. What are you doing to turn those programs around?" On Space Launch Systems, I am really proud of the team for the amazing capabilities they developed with the world's largest rocket. She's sitting on the stand at Stennis Space Center after watching how this team has battled through the COVID crisis. I'm looking forward to having a hot fire test later this year. Early on, we struggled on SLS from an execution phase. There were also different challenges from a funding perspective and other things. Over the course of the last 1.5-2 years, the team has been hitting its milestones and commitments. Kathy Luters, when she worked at NASA, also supported that view. Orion is complete, and SLS is on track for its last major test later this year, 2020, before flight. These systems will be integrated early next year and launched together for the first time on an uncrewed flight test around the Moon in 2021, followed by a test flight with crew around the Moon in 2023. Unfortunately, the reality is a bitter pill. We had to wait until late 2022 to see Artemis 1 launch. And with the current situation, it would be hard to have the next Artemis missions on time. So, NASA should consider the alternative option to use SpaceX's Falcon Heavy. And that just about wraps it up for today's episode. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.